There are secrets buried deeper than ancient copper mines. I had lived
Shh,
43
they're
years on
close.
this
We
mountain
need to move now.
without knowing that my peace was purchased with the sacrifices of those who came before. Sometimes the people we help end up changing our lives forever. The morning mist clung to the pine needles like memories refusing to fade as I adjusted the worn leather strap of my gathering basket. At 43, I moved through these Colorado mountains with the quiet confidence of someone who knew every secret the wilderness held, or so I believed, until this moment. He was slumped against the ancient oak my grandfather had always called the Sentinel, dark hair matted with blood and pine sap, his clothes torn and stained. But it was his eyes that held my attention, not the desperate, pleading eyes of a man seeking help, but the watchful, calculating eyes of someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you need to leave this place now." I had lived alone on this mountain for 15 years, ever since my husband Matthew died in the mine accident that took half the men in Copper Creek. I'd learned to read danger in the set of a man's shoulders, the tension in his jaw, the way his hand rested near his weapon. This man was dangerous, certainly, but not to me. Not right now. "You're bleeding," I said, setting down my basket. "That wound needs tending." "Did you hear what I said?" His hand moved to the gun at his hip, not as a threat, but as reassurance. "This isn't a place for—" A sound drifted through the trees, low and rumbling like distant thunder, but wrong somehow. Too rhythmic, too deliberate. The stranger's face went pale, and his grip tightened on his revolver. "Don't talk," he whispered urgently, pressing his finger to his lips. "Whatever you do, don't make a sound." I wonder now if you've ever had a moment when everything you thought you knew about your world shifted beneath your feet. Are you listening from somewhere safe and warm today? I'd love to know in the comments if you've ever encountered a stranger who changed your life forever. I'd heard many things in these woods over the years: the whistle of wind through the canyon, the crack of settling timber, the occasional rock slide echoing from the old mine workings. But this was different. This sounded almost like voices, many voices speaking in unison, too far away to make out words, but close enough to send ice through my veins. The sound faded, leaving only the normal chorus of morning birds and rustling leaves. The stranger's breathing gradually slowed, but his eyes never stopped scanning the tree line. "My name is Eleanor Mills," I said quietly. "This is my land." He studied me for a long moment, weighing something in his mind. "Daniel Hayes," he said finally, "and if this is your land, ma'am, then you're in more danger than you know." I had heard the name before. Daniel Hayes, wanted for robbery and assault across 3 territories. The kind of man decent people cross the street to avoid. But looking at him now, slumped and bleeding beneath my grandfather's oak, I saw something else. Fear. Real, bone-deep terror of whatever had made that sound in the forest. "Can you walk?" I asked. "Ma'am, you don't understand. I understand that you're bleeding all over my grandfather's favorite tree. And if you stay here much longer, you'll either bleed to death or whatever you're afraid of will find you." I picked up my basket and slung it across my shoulder. "My cabin's a quarter-mile up the ridge. Can you make it?" The cabin sat in a clearing my grandfather had carved from the forest 40 years ago. The logs were still solid, chinked tight against the mountain winters, with a stone chimney that drew clean and windows that faced east to catch the morning light. A vegetable garden sprawled along the south side, and herbs hung drying from the covered porch. It was a simple life, but it was mine. Daniel collapsed into the chair beside my kitchen table while I gathered supplies from shelves lined with jars and bottles. My grandmother had taught me the healing arts, knowledge passed down through generations of mountain women who lived too far from towns to rely on doctors. "This will hurt," I warned, cleaning the wound on his leg. The bullet had passed through the meaty part of his thigh, missing the bone but leaving a ragged hole that would take time to heal. "I've had worse," he said through gritted teeth. "Ma'am, Eleanor, you need to know something about this mountain, about what's down in those mine shafts." I worked in silence, stitching the wound with practiced efficiency. My grandfather had been one of the men who first opened the Copper Creek mine back in 1882. I had grown up on stories of the early days, when copper ore came out of the mountain by the wagon load, and the future seemed bright as a new penny. "My grandfather used to work those mines," I said, tying off the last stitch. "Before they sealed them up." Daniel's head snapped up. "Sealed them? When?" "After the accident. The 1882 cave-in killed 16 men, including my great-uncle Samuel." I began wrapping the wound with clean bandages. "They said the mine was too dangerous to continue working." "They lied." Daniel's voice was flat, certain. "Those mines weren't sealed because of a cave-in. They were sealed because of what the miners found down there." Before he could elaborate, the sound of hoofbeats echoed up from the valley below. Daniel was on his feet instantly, despite his wounded leg, moving to the window with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to trouble. "Riders," he said, "3 of them coming up the main trail." Through the trees, I could see dust clouds raised by fast-moving horses. Soon, 3 men with hard faces rode into view, the leader sporting a silver badge on his vest. "Mrs. Mills," he called out, "Sheriff Thompson from Copper Creek. We're looking for a dangerous fugitive. Wondered if you might have seen anyone unusual in these parts." I glanced at Daniel, who had pressed himself against the wall beside the window, out of sight but ready to move. I could turn him in right now, collect whatever reward was on his head, and go back to my quiet life. It would be the sensible thing to do. Instead, I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. "Morning, Sheriff. Can't say I've seen anyone. What kind of dangerous are we talking about?" "Armed robbery, murder, the usual." Thompson's eyes swept the clearing, taking in every detail. "Man named Daniel Hayes. Last seen heading this direction after a shootout in Black Hawk." "I'll keep an eye out," I said. "Anything else I should know about this fellow?" "He's wounded. Took a bullet in the leg during the chase. Won't get far on foot in this terrain." "I understand, Sheriff." The lawmen turned their horses and rode back down the trail, but I noticed they didn't head toward town. Instead, they took the path that led deeper into the mountains, toward the old mine workings. I closed the door and found Daniel watching me with something like gratitude in his eyes. "Why?" he asked simply. "Because a man doesn't get that scared of empty mine shafts," I said, "and because those weren't lawmen. Sheriff Thompson died 3 years ago. Heart attack. I was at his funeral." Daniel sank back into his chair, the weight of understanding settling over him. "Then we're both in trouble now, because they're not going to just ride away and forget about this place." From deep within the mountain came that strange sound again, louder this time and somehow closer. Through the window, I could see birds taking flight from the trees near the mine entrance, as if something had disturbed them. "Mr. Hayes," I said quietly, "I think it's time you told me exactly what you found down there." 3 weeks ago, he explained, a man named Alexander Prescott hired him to survey the Copper Creek mine. Claimed his company, Horizon Mining, was interested in reopening it to extract whatever copper ore might be left. The money was real enough, $500 just to map the tunnels and assess structural integrity. For a man with a price on his head, that kind of work seemed like a gift. "Should have known better." Daniel's laugh was bitter. On his second day of exploration, he had found a sealed section, a stone wall, 6 feet thick, fitted so tight you could barely see the joints. But someone had been working on it recently. New tool marks, fresh rubble. They'd opened a hole just big enough for a man to crawl through. "Beyond that wall," Daniel said, his voice dropping, "there was a chamber, big as a church with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness. There were bones, human bones, dozens of skeletons arranged in a circle around something in the center." "What was in the center?" I asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "An altar. stone, carved with symbols I'd never seen before. And on top of it, he stopped, his face going pale. God help me. There was something wrapped in burial cloth, something that shouldn't have been there. Before he could continue, a child's scream pierced the morning air, high and terrified, coming from somewhere near the mine entrance. My blood turned to ice as I recognized the voice. Little Sophie Reynolds from the valley, who sometimes wandered up the mountain looking for wildflowers. Dear God, I breathed. There's a child down there. I grabbed my rifle and headed for the door. Are you coming with me, or are you going to sit there and bleed on my furniture? Daniel struggled to his feet, favoring his wounded leg, but managing to stand. Those things, they're not going to just let us walk down there. Then we'll have to convince them otherwise. When we stepped outside, I could feel something had changed. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with a tension that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. As we moved toward the mine entrance, shapes emerged from the tree line. Tall, elongated figures that moved with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and terrible to behold. They had once been human, that much was clear, but something had changed them, stretched them, made them into something else. And then I saw him, Robert Reynolds, Sophie's father, who had gone missing 2 weeks ago while searching for a lost calf. His proportions were wrong now, his arms too long, his movements too fluid. But when he saw me, there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a desperate plea trapped behind something alien and hungry. Eleanor, he rasped, his voice like stones grinding together. She's calling. Sophie. They're using her to draw us in. Who's using her, Robert? What happened to you? The deep ones. Ancient. Hungry. His words came with obvious struggle, as if speaking against his will. Dug too deep. Found the chamber. Now they want the bloodlines. The guardians. His body convulsed, and when he looked at me again, the humanity had vanished from his eyes. He lunged forward with inhuman speed, and Daniel fired his revolver. The shot caught Robert in the shoulder, spinning him around but not stopping him. These things, whatever they had become, weren't easily killed. I wonder, have you ever had to face your greatest fear to protect someone you care about? If you're enjoying this story so far, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next part of this tale. The service tunnel, I said suddenly, remembering my grandfather's stories. There's an old air shaft that connects to the main mine. If it's still open, we can reach Sophie without going through them. The service tunnel entrance was partially concealed by 40 years of brush and rockfall, but the opening was still passable. I lit the oil lantern I'd brought and led the way into the narrow passage, Daniel following close behind. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle, carved roughly through solid rock. This connects to the main shaft about halfway down, I explained, my voice echoing in the confined space. A sound echoed up from the depths below. Sophie's voice, but wrong somehow. Too calm, too measured for a frightened child. Eleanor? Eleanor, where are you? I'm waiting in the special place. Daniel grabbed my arm. That's not her. Not anymore. What do you mean? I've heard that voice before. Down in the sealed chamber. It's how they call to you, make you want to come deeper. The tunnel opened into the main mine shaft, a circular chamber carved from living rock with passages leading off in 3 directions. Ancient timbers still supported the ceiling, though many showed signs of rot and stress. The air was thick with the smell of dampness and something else, something organic and unpleasant. The easternmost tunnel, Daniel pointed toward the darkest of the 3 passages. That's where I found the sealed chamber. Sophie's voice drifted up from that direction, still calling with that unnaturally calm tone. But there were other sounds now too, the scrape of movement in the darkness, the whisper of fabric against stone. As we moved deeper, I noticed symbols carved into the walls, spirals and angular patterns that seemed to shift and move in the lantern light. "Do you know what these mean?" I asked. Prescott claimed they were Native American, but I've never seen anything like them before. Daniel traced one of the symbols with his finger. "They're old, though, much older than the mine." In a small alcove partially hidden behind fallen timber, we found my grandfather's journal, not his mining records that I'd seen before, but a separate volume, bound in cracked leather and filled with his careful handwriting. The last entries, dated October 1882, told a different story than the one I'd been raised with. October 22nd, they took Samuel in the night, found him this morning arranged with the others in that cursed chamber. His eyes, God forgive me, his eyes were still open, still aware. The things that guard this place, they don't kill, they collect. October 24th, sealed the tunnel today, used every man left alive and all the dynamite we could spare. May God forgive us for what we've done, but better to bury the truth than let it walk the earth. If anyone reads this, know that some doors should never be opened. Some hunger should never be fed. The guardian families must maintain the seals. For as long as the mountain stands, a Mills and a Reynolds must keep watch. Guardian families, I whispered, the weight of generations settling onto my shoulders. My family and Sophie's family. "The bloodlines," Daniel said grimly. "That's what they're after." We reached the sealed chamber, or what had once been sealed. The massive stone door lay shattered, and beyond it was exactly as Daniel had described. A vast circular space with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness. Bones littered the floor, arranged in careful patterns that spiraled inward toward the center. And sitting on top of the stone altar, her small legs dangling over the edge, was Sophie Reynolds. She looked exactly as she had when I'd last seen her in town. 7 years old with blonde pigtails and a bright blue dress, except for her eyes. Her eyes reflected the lantern light like an animal's, and when she smiled, her teeth seemed too sharp. "Eleanor," Sophie called out cheerfully, "did you come to see the pretty room too?" I took a step forward, but Daniel caught my arm. "Don't," he warned. "Look at the altar." The stone surface beneath Sophie was covered with dark stains, and wrapped in burial cloth at the base of the altar was the shape Daniel had described, roughly human, but too long and too thin. As we watched, it stirred, one long arm emerging from the burial cloth, fingers ending in claws that scraped against the stone. Sophie giggled, the sound echoing strangely in the vast chamber. "He's almost ready to play. Daddy said I just have to wait a little longer, and then we can all be together forever." From the tunnel behind us came the sound of movement, slow, deliberate footsteps approaching through the darkness. The creatures from above had found the service tunnel and were coming down to join what they clearly saw as a reunion. "We need to get Sophie and get out of here," I said, raising my rifle. "And how exactly do you propose we do that?" Daniel asked. "She's sitting on top of whatever they're trying to resurrect, and we're about to be trapped between it and them." The wrapped figure on the altar sat up slowly, burial cloth falling away to reveal a face that had once been human, but was now something else entirely. Its eyes opened, glowing with a pale light that cast strange shadows on the chamber walls. "So long have I slept," it said in a voice like grinding stone. "So long have I hungered. But now the feast begins." Suddenly, Sophie looked directly at me with eyes that were completely, desperately human. "Eleanor," the little girl whispered, her voice breaking with terror. "Please help me. I can't move. I can't get down. Something's holding me here." Then the human light in her eyes flickered and died, replaced once more by that unnatural glow. "But I don't want to leave," she said in her calm, wrong voice. "This is where I belong now." The footsteps in the tunnel were getting closer. The ancient creature on the altar stretched its limbs, joints popping like breaking kindling after decades of stillness. "Two more for the collection," it said, its voice echoing from the stone walls. "How thoughtful of my servants to bring them directly to me." Daniel raised his revolver, but the creature moved faster than anything that old and decrepit had any right to. Its clawed hand swept out, knocking the gun from his grip and sending it clattering across the bone-strewn floor. "Now, now," the creature chided, settling back onto the altar with Sophie still perched beside it like a grotesque doll. "There's no need for violence. Soon you'll understand that this is exactly where you're meant to be." The creature's hand rested gently on Sophie's shoulder, almost paternal if you ignored the fact that the touch was slowly draining the color from her skin. "She came to me willingly, you see, called by her father's voice, led down into the darkness by love and concern." Sophie's head turned toward us with jerky, unnatural movements. When she spoke, her voice was layered, her own childish tones overlaid with something ancient and hungry. "Eleanor, why won't you come closer? I want to show you the pretty pictures on the walls." For the first time, I noticed the symbols carved into the chamber walls weren't just decorative. They seemed to be moving, writhing like living things in the lantern light. As I watched, they began to pulse with the same pale glow as the creature's eyes. "The old warnings," Daniel breathed. "These aren't just random symbols. They're a binding ritual." "Very good," the creature said approvingly. "Your people called my kind many names over the centuries. Demons, spirits, the hungry dead. But we are simply what we are, the first inhabitants of this land, driven deep by those who feared what they couldn't understand." The symbols pulsed brighter, and I felt a strange tugging sensation, as if something invisible was trying to pull me forward toward the altar. I planted my feet and resisted, but the pull grew stronger. "The binding grows stronger with each sacrifice," the creature explained. "Each life freely given weakens the barriers between our realm and yours. Soon my children will walk freely in the world above, and the living will learn to serve as they were always meant to." Footsteps sounded at the chamber entrance. Alexander Prescott stepped through, flanked by men in Horizon mining uniforms. But his eyes held the same unnatural glow as the transformed creatures, and his smile revealed too many teeth. "The guardian bloodlines," Prescott said, his voice carrying unnatural harmonics. "Both of them in one place. How convenient." I looked from the creature to Sophie to Daniel, desperately searching for a way out, a way to save the child without dooming us all. And then I saw it, my grandfather's journal, still clutched in my hand. The pages had fallen open to a diagram I hadn't noticed before, showing the arrangement of the binding stones in the chamber. And there, in his careful handwriting, were instructions for something called the false binding, a ritual that appeared to give the creature what it wanted, but actually strengthened the seals instead. But it required a key piece, something called the keystone, hidden in a natural cavern beneath the mine. And according to my grandfather's notes, only Sophie would be able to find it, guided by her guardian blood. I needed to reach Sophie, to break whatever hold the creature had on her long enough for her true self to emerge. I clutched the silver pendant Matthew had given me the day before he died, a family heirloom he'd said would protect me when he couldn't. It had always seemed warm to the touch, but now it was almost hot, as if responding to the ancient energies in the chamber. "Sophie," I called, holding up the pendant, "do you remember what you told me last summer when you came to pick herbs with me? About how you sometimes dream of deep places with glowing walls?" The creature's head snapped toward me, its eyes narrowing, but Sophie's expression flickered, the unnatural glow dimming for a moment as recognition dawned. "I dream of a big cave," she said, her voice suddenly her own again, "with red light in the walls and a big black stone in the middle." "That's right, sweetheart. And do you remember the way there? Is it somewhere you could show us?" No! The creature snarled, its grip tightening on Sophie. But the pendant in my hand flared with sudden light, and the creature recoiled as if burned. The guardian token, it hissed. Where did you get that? It was enough. Just enough distraction for Sophie to slip from its grasp. She ran to me, her small body trembling with fear, but her eyes clear and human. Eleanor, she gasped. I know where the pretty stone is, the one they're afraid of. Daniel had recovered his revolver and was holding Prescott and his men at bay. Whatever you're planning, he said to me, we need to do it fast. I've wondered many times if there was ever a moment in your life when you realized that the responsibility you'd been avoiding was actually your purpose all along. When I held that terrified child in my arms and felt the weight of generations of guardians looking down at me, I knew I had to stop running from who I was meant to be. Sophie led us through a narrow crack in the chamber wall that I would have sworn wasn't there moments before. Behind us, the creature roared in fury, its voice shaking loose stones from the ceiling. We squeezed through into a natural cavern system that sloped steeply downward, following Sophie's unerring instinct. My daddy showed me in the dreams, she explained as we hurried through passages that glittered with mineral deposits. Before the bad thing took him over completely, the cavern opened into a vast natural space, far larger than the ritual chamber above. A red glow emanated from veins of some mineral in the walls, pulsing like a heartbeat. At the center, surrounded by a pool of water that steamed in the warm air, sat a pillar of black stone. Embedded in the top of that pillar was the keystone, carved with symbols that seemed to move and shift in the red light. There it is, Sophie said simply. Daniel started toward the pillar, but I caught his arm. Wait, I said. Something's wrong here. The cavern was too perfect, too obviously a focal point for whatever power slept in the mountain, and the keystone sat there unguarded, as if waiting for someone to claim it. It's a trap, I realized. That creature, it wants us to take the keystone. Sophie nodded solemnly. He needs someone to carry it to the circle, someone who isn't changed yet. The keystone won't work if one of his servants touches it. Then we leave it here, Daniel said. Without the keystone, the ritual can't be completed. But the ritual's already started, Sophie pointed out. If it's not completed properly, the binding energy will collapse inward. The whole mountain will explode. The implications hit us all at once. The ancient creature had set up a no-win scenario. If we completed the ritual by bringing the keystone to the circle, it would gain the power to transform the entire territory. If we didn't complete the ritual, the unstable binding energy would destroy everything for miles around. Then I remembered the false binding from my grandfather's journal. It required the keystone, yes, but it also required someone who had been partially transformed to place it on the altar. I looked at Daniel, and I knew he had realized it too. During his time in the chamber, he had been exposed to the creature's influence. The dark veins spreading under the skin of his arm were proof of that. He was changing, slowly but surely. I'll do it, he said simply, lifting the keystone from its resting place. The moment his fingers touched the carved surface, the dark veins under his skin began to pulse with the same pale light as the creature's eyes. You're very brave, Mr. Hayes, Sophie said. Her eyes filled with a wisdom far beyond her years. No, he replied with a sad smile. I'm just a man who made too many bad choices. This is the first good one I've made in years. We made our way back to the ritual chamber, Daniel carrying the keystone, while Sophie whispered to me the words I would need to speak to complete the false binding. The ancient creature sensed our approach and smiled with too many teeth, believing it had won. The guardian child returns with the tainted one, it said, its voice vibrating with anticipation. And they bring me my prize. Prescott and his transformed men formed a circle around the altar, their voices raised in that haunting chant I had first heard in the forest. The binding symbols on the walls pulsed in rhythm with their words, drawing energy from the earth itself. Daniel approached the altar, fighting against the creature's influence with every step. I could see the strain in his face, the sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled to maintain control of his own body. "The keystone must be placed just so," Sophie whispered to me. "And then you have to say the words from Grandfather's book. The guardian words, not the ones they're saying." As Daniel reached the altar, Robert Reynolds, or what had once been Robert, suddenly moved. But instead of stopping Daniel, he turned and grabbed Prescott, restraining him with inhuman strength. "Now!" Robert gasped, fighting against his own transformation. "Do it now!" Daniel placed the keystone on the altar, positioning it exactly as Sophie had instructed. The creature reached for it eagerly, but Daniel held firm, his eyes meeting mine across the chamber. "The words, Eleanor," he called. "Speak them now." I raised my grandfather's journal and began to read the incantation written in his careful hand. Not the words of binding that the creature expected, but words of sealing, of protection, of banishment. "By guardian blood and guardian will," I called out, my voice growing stronger with each word. "By the compact made in the deep time, I bind you to the depths forever. Sleep now and wake no more." The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The binding stones around the circle began to crack and crumble, releasing centuries of stored energy in brilliant flashes of light. The creature's scream shook the entire mountain, and chunks of rock began falling from the chamber's ceiling. "The whole place is coming down," Daniel shouted. "Get Sophie out of here." I grabbed Sophie's hand and pulled her toward the exit, but I couldn't leave, not yet. "Daniel, come on." He shook his head, still holding the keystone in place as the ritual energy swirled around him. "Too late for me," he said with a sad smile. "I'm already part of it now, but I can make sure it stays sealed, for good this time." The keystone in his hands began to glow brighter and brighter until I had to shield my eyes against the light. With one final surge of will, Daniel slammed the stone down onto the altar with all his strength. The keystone shattered into 1,000 pieces, each fragment glowing with the same pale light as the creature's eyes. The effect was immediate. The binding stones around the circle collapsed, and the floor of the chamber split open, revealing a chasm that led down into impenetrable darkness. The creature's form began to dissolve, pulled downward by forces beyond human understanding. Its last words echoed through the chamber as it disappeared into the cracking stone. "This is not ended, guardian child. Others will come. Others will seek what I have guarded." Then it was gone, drawn back into whatever deep realm had spawned it. The transformed beings collapsed as one, their connection to the entity severed. Robert Reynolds drew breath again as the corruption left his body, his form returning to normal as he slumped unconscious to the floor. Daniel stood at the edge of the chasm, his body outlined in fading light. "Go," he said softly. "Take care of them. Be the guardian you were meant to be." Then the light engulfed him completely, and when it faded, he was gone, absorbed into the very seals that now bound the creature more securely than ever before. Sophie and I helped her father from the collapsing chamber, making our way through tunnels that were rapidly sealing themselves as the mountain's energies realigned. By the time we emerged into the sunlight, the mine entrance had completely disappeared, replaced by solid rock as if it had never existed at all. When Sarah Iron Hawk gave me the Guardian Stone, she said something I'll never forget. "No one was designed to face the darkness alone. We are strongest when we stand together." That's when I realized the solitary life I had chosen wasn't my family's true legacy. Have you ever discovered that what you needed had been beside you all along? Share your thoughts in the comments below. 5 years have passed since what the town records call a mining accident claimed the lives of Alexander Prescott and several Horizon mining employees. The Copper Creek mine remains sealed, its location almost impossible to find unless you know exactly where to look. My cabin is no longer a place of solitude. Sophie visits often to learn about her guardian abilities, and Robert has found new purpose in teaching her the responsibilities of their bloodline. The network of guardians that Sarah Ironhawk introduced me to has become my extended family, people scattered across the country who share the burden of keeping ancient evils safely contained. Sometimes on nights when the moon is dark, I see strange lights moving deep within the mountain. Not threatening lights, but protective ones. And I know that Daniel Hayes found redemption in the end, his spirit becoming part of the mountain's defenses. I still tend my garden and gather herbs, but I no longer walk these forests alone. I've learned that pain and loss are not the end of the story, but part of a longer journey. And that it's never too late to find purpose, to find community, to find home. The ancient evil sleeps once more, bound by seals that will hold for generations to come. And when the time comes for those seals to be renewed, the guardian families will be ready. It's a heavy responsibility, but also a privilege to be entrusted with the safety of those who will never know what sleeps beneath their feet. In the distance, an owl calls to its mate, and the mountain whispers its eternal secrets to the wind. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds, the music of a world that sleeps safely because someone chose to stand guard through the night.